ever struggled with sewing curves to make a quilt? Me too. Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane, and today I'm going to share with you the tips, tricks, and techniques I've learned to make sewing curves a breeze. One of the first quilts I ever made, it was probably like my second or third quilt, involved curves. And of course at the time I was too naive to realize how intimidated I really should be. So I wasn't scared at all, I just dove right in, but I really had no idea what I was doing. So let's dive into what I learned on that project and what I've learned since then to hopefully make your first curved piece and quilt a success. Learn how to sew curves like this with confidence by following these simple steps. First off, I like to prep my fabric. If you've watched pretty much any of my videos, then you know that I like to spray pretty much all my quilting cottons with Best Press and iron it with a hot iron before I even start cutting into the fabrics. Using Best Press or similar spray starch helps give your fabric a nice crisp feel to it and keeps it from stretching as you're sewing around the curves. The second really important thing is precise cutting. I love using AccuQuilt. AccuQuilt is a fabric cutting machine. You can actually see mine stored up here in the corner. That's the AccuQuilt Go cutting machine. If you want to learn more about AccuQuilt, check out the video linked above here. That'll show you how to use my AccuQuilt and kind of all the basics. But for this particular project, I will show you, I used an AccuQuilt die. This is what the die looks like. Let me get it straight. This is the Drunkard's Path die with 4-inch finished blocks, and it makes 2 blocks per layer cut. And I cut out 2 layers to make this block. It comes to 8 inches finished, and so it's 4 of the Drunkard's Path arranged with the circle in the center. And I'm going to show you how I made it with this video. But of course, if you're not using AccuQuilt to cut your pieces, you can still be successful as well. The important thing is to do precise cutting. So if you're using a rotary cutter, you can of course be precise with that as well. There are lots of templates and rulers out there too that you can use. I got started using cardboard, and every time I cut a piece, I would sometimes nick off a little sliver of that cardboard, making the template smaller and smaller as I went along. And I don't recommend that. But what you can do is get acrylic rulers. From most quilt shops will have some sort of rulers. These are some that I had on hand for a Drunkard's Path quilt actually, but I definitely recommend the Color Girl Quilt curved templates as well. That has 10 different sizes of curves that you can use, so you can use it for multiple projects as well. If you plan on cutting out your curved pieces with an AccuQuilt cutting machine like I have here, you'll want to grab the die that you plan to use, some fabric, and then of course a cutting mat like this one. I've pre-cut my fabric into strips so that I can easily line them up on this block. So I've got 2 strips for the inner circles here, and then I've got 2 strips here for the outer parts of the die. So once you have your fabrics lined up how you want them, you just place the mat on top, you press it down, and then you go ahead and hand crank this machine to feed it through the machine. And then once it comes out the other side, you press down and slide it off, and then you should be good to go. Go ahead and pull off your excess, making sure that you have your pieces cut as you wanted them. So now you'll see here I have 4 outer pieces and 4 inner pieces, so I can put these together to make a block just like this one. Of course, if you don't have an AccuQuilt cutting machine, you can still cut out curved pieces using a template like these. There are tons of different acrylic templates out there. I'll link a couple of my favorites in the description below for you. But just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to use these Drunkard's Path templates by Maxi Makes. So here I've picked out these 2 fabrics that I've already starched for the inner circle, and then I'm going to use this nice fun yellow for the outer circles. So what I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit easier, is fold this fabric. I'll cut these outer circles first. Let me see if that fits. Just barely. So what I will go ahead and do is line this up on top of all the layers and then use my rotary cutter So now you can see we have all 4 pieces for the outer circles of our drunkard's path. So now we'll go ahead and cut out the inner circles as well. So now, because I'm using just scraps for this project, you'll see it's going to be kind of tight to fit 2 in if we were to do it this way and cut all 4 layers at once. So I'm going to cut 1 this way and then rotate it and cut 1 this way. You'll see we have 2. So now we just need 2 more on this. All right. So we've used our templates to cut out our 4 pieces for the inside circle and also our pieces for the outside circles. But one thing that the AccuQuilt cuts give you that the acrylic templates do not are these little notches. So as you can see, there's a tiny little notch right at the center of that piece, and then we're going to match it up with a notch at the center of these pieces. So those notches are super important for matching up the center of your curve. The acrylic template does not offer that, so we make our own. So we can do that just by finger pressing. We'll fold the piece in half and then press down to create a crease right at the center. And then we'll do that for the inner piece as well, right at the center. So now we know the center of our curves by matching them up with the little crease that we just created. I'll do that on all of our pieces. So now once all of your notches are marked for the center of each curve, it's time to baste them together. So now I've lined up the center of each one, and I've grabbed my glue stick. I like to use a simple glue stick just like this one to baste the pieces together. And after this, I will also show you how you might do it with pins if you don't have a glue stick handy. So first off, we want to make sure that we put right sides together. So I'm going to fold the outer circle over the inner circle, and we will line up that center notch that we spoke about earlier. And I'll go ahead and just put a dot of glue right at that notch. And match the notches together and stick them together. And then we want to go ahead and ease this curve around that inner curve. So what we'll start off by doing is just putting a dot right at the end and then draw a line just along the edge within that 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way over, and then we will ease this curve on top of that other one. And then we press it nice and tight. And then we'll go ahead and do that for the other half of the curve as well. Now I personally prefer doing this with the glue stick because it's nice and dry and secure after just pressing it into place. If you prefer to use liquid glue like Elmer's school glue, you can then also give it a nice press with a hot iron to dry the glue. But I'm not going to worry about ironing it because it sticks in place already. Now I'll also show you how to do it using pins in case you don't have a glue stick. We'll go ahead and match right sides together just like we did previously, and then go ahead and match the notches in the center. And we'll go ahead and pin one right in the center. You can pin either with your pin pointing that way, or you can actually pin with the head of the pin out, and you just make sure that you pull the pin out before you hit it as you're sewing. I personally prefer to pin this way, and I try to keep the tip of the pin at least a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric so that I don't necessarily have to worry about hitting a pin while I'm sewing. And then just like we did with the glue, we're going to go ahead and ease the curve over. But just to make sure that things really stick, we'll pinch down at the end itself and put a pin right at the starting point of where we're going to start sewing. And then we'll do the same thing for the opposite side. Now, if you prefer, you can just do those 3 pins, one in the middle and one on each side, because this is a fairly small block. I think that's plenty, but you might also feel the need to add in a couple extra pins. So we might just add a pin in between each set of pins that we've already put in. So now, as you can see, we've basted it with pins, we've basted this one with glue, and now we can go over to our sewing machine and I'll show you some sewing tips to keep in mind. So now we're at our sewing machine. I have threaded it with 50 weight cotton thread in both the bobbin and the upper thread, and I have my 1/4 inch piecing foot on my machine, a nice sharp needle, and I've already stitched on a leader so that I make sure that my threads don't get sucked into the machine. So we'll start off by sewing together our piece that we glue basted. We'll go ahead and just start sewing. We'll keep it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance as we go. One important thing you want to keep in mind is to put your needle down. On my machine, putting the needle down also lifts up the foot just enough that you can move around the fabric, but the needle stays keeping the stitches in place. When you start sewing again, the needle, the presser foot drops and the needle stays down until you start sewing. One important thing also to keep in mind is to sew slowly. So if you can adjust the speed on your machine, that can certainly help. But one thing you just want to watch out for is puckers. So make sure that you're not getting any puckers under that needle as you stitch around the curve. And next we'll do the same thing but with our piece that has pins in it. So we'll go ahead, and this one just takes a little bit more work, making sure that you are easing the edges together. And then I can trim them apart from each other and snip off our little leader that we had earlier. And finally, you can finish off your curved piecing quilt blocks by pressing your seams nice and flat. Once your iron is nice and hot, you're ready to go ahead and press your curved blocks together. Now with the drunkard's path design, I'm going to go ahead and press that curve towards the outer circle. That's kind of the way it wants to go anyway. If you wanted to press towards the inner circle, you could do that. It'll just be a little bit more tricky. So I'm going to press towards the outer circle. Go ahead and finger press it in place, and then just grab your hot iron and give it a nice good press. If you have a steam iron, you could use the steam as well. I personally just use a little spray bottle. Give it a little spritz, and then give it a nice good press again. If you have a tailor's clapper, you can also use that. So I'll go ahead and place my tailor's clapper on top, and the hardwood goes ahead and soaks up the heat to make that nice and crisp seam, just like that. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing on the one that we pinned. As you can see, there are some teeny tiny puckers. So we're going to go ahead and just make sure that those do not show up as we press. So again, just a nice hot press with the hot iron, a little spritz, press again, and then a few seconds under the tailor's clapper. And there we go, another perfect curve, nice and pretty. And now we just need to repeat those same steps using the remaining pieces that we have cut out, and then we can sew them in together into a block such as this. This block was actually really easy to make. I just sewed the blocks together and pressed the middle seam open. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make curved quilt blocks just like this one today, and I hope you'll carry on these tips, tricks, and techniques into your next quilting project. For more quilting inspiration, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and also check out HomemadeEmilyJane.com.